Welcome to the sixth story for Clarkesworld Magazine. I'm your host and narrator, Kate Baker. We're into March, issue 222. And you know what that means? 222 issues have been brought to you by your support. So thank you if you are an ongoing subscriber or patron over at patreon.com/Clarkesworld. And if you haven't yet chucked a few bucks our way, please consider doing so. Well, we offer our fiction for free online. It's not free putting it together, and most of us are trying to earn a wage by doing this, whether they are a writer, an artist, an editor, or a narrator. So thank you. Our story is titled The Sound of the Star. It is by Ren Zeyu, translated by Jay Zhang. Zeyu Ren is a Chinese science fiction writer with a BFA from UCLA, where he initially entered as an astrophysics major. He later earned his MFA from RSID, establishing himself as a pioneer in VR animation. His sci-fi shorts have been selected at animation festivals worldwide. Currently based in New York City, Ren writes the Planet Diary column for Science Fiction World Magazine. Growing up in Guangzhou and Southern California, Jay Zhang is a literary translator currently pursuing their PhD in East Asian languages and civilizations at the University of Pennsylvania. Academically, their interests lie in issues of religion, culture, and identity. Outside of school, they're an avid fan of tabletop games, Xi'an food, and horror fiction. So, my dear listener, I hope you can sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. Kinmi. I visited almost 100 planets at this point, but I'll never forget how bizarre it felt to step foot in Kinmi for the first time. I followed my map to the busiest bar on the planet, and when I walked in, the bar was packed and bustling. But all I could hear were the creaks of tables and chairs scraping against the floor. Everyone inside had their mouths open, chattering away, but I couldn't hear a thing. Eventually, I started to make out a faint sound in the silence, shrill and piercing, like feedback noise when you get a microphone too close to a speaker. I followed that sound further into the bar, towards a table at the very back. 2 kinmites were sitting at the table, and as I got closer, I gradually started to pick out their voices. Once they noticed me, they warmly invited me to take a seat. One of them, a girl with long hair named Jitu, told me that it'd been months since she'd last been able to communicate with anyone through sound. Kinmites' vocal and auditory organs are connected, and they can only detect and produce sound in a limited band of frequencies. In their youth, their vocal chambers vibrate at up to 150 hertz, too high for the older kinmites. No matter how loudly they babble about, none of the adults can hear them. As they age, muscle atrophy of their vocal chambers causes them to only be able to hear and produce lower sounds, meaning that kinmites can only communicate with peers of the same age. To run into a traveler they could communicate with, then, was even better than running into someone from their own neighborhood while out and about. It brought with it an instant sense of kinship. I stayed on Kinmi for 3 months, during which time I swapped out my ship's gravitational monsoon rudder for a new one, and got dragged along by Jitu to Kinmi's annual Day of Harmony. On that day, each of the kinmites sang one by one at their assigned time, oldest to youngest, building up the notes of a scale until the entire song of the star was finished. The entire town would be filled with it. A deep, rumbling bass line would give way to a human-like a cappella chorus, and then to a twittering tune as high-pitched as birdsong in a forest. Midway through the performance, I stopped being able to hear the elementary schoolers' chorus. My human hearing range, after all, was too narrow to capture the full song. I checked in with Shitu one last time before I left, to say my goodbyes. She didn't want me to go. "Maybe one day I'll be able to leave this planet and travel like you," she said, by way of reluctant farewell. "But with our vocal chambers, maybe we'll never be able to leave our own kind." I realized then that her voice had deepened already from when we'd first met, and that if I didn't deliberately lower my voice to match, she'd have a hard time catching my words. "You should be free to do what you want," I replied, trying to comfort her. "The universe is more than big enough. You're bound to find someone you resonate with out there." She smiled. Thanks. But the next time we see each other, we might not be able to hear each other's voices. That evening, I took off and left Qian Mi behind. As I watched the planet grow farther and farther away, I was struck by how lucky I'd been to have shared a frequency with them at all. Lasante. As someone who travels between planets quite a bit, I often get asked to deliver some small packages here and there, letters from star system cross lovers, say, or vacuum-polished ornaments made from a comet's heart, or jars of raso poetry. Jars, of course, because their poems are written in three-dimensional crystal dust. The trickiest deliveries to make are usually animals. Not only do they often end up becoming invasive species elsewhere in the universe, but they're often unable to adapt to a new starfield's different physical constants and die before ever reaching their destination. I owed a certain rich man a favor, so I agreed to help him capture a sackful of male three-legged dragonflies from the planet Lasante. Exceptionally short-lived, these particular dragonflies start flapping their wings at breakneck pace as soon as they're born, flying straight toward nearby light sources. When I handed over my black box full of dragonflies to my client, he took me to a laboratory. I followed him down to the basement level where he flicked off the lights, leaving only a faint blue light in a glass chamber to light the darkness. He brought the box of dragonflies over to an opening in the glass chamber, then set one free. The dragonfly's wings began to shimmer brighter and brighter in the light as it picked up speed, and then after a few seconds, it disappeared into thin air. These three-legged dragonflies, my client explained to me, were naturally biofluorescent. Once their wings pick up enough speed, the chemical compounds on their wings react to heat generated from air resistance, triggering a Stokes shift, a shortening of the wavelengths of light absorbed by those compounds. The Stokes shift is defined as the difference between the maximum absorption and emission wavelengths of a molecule. Once those wavelengths enter the ultraviolet light range, invisible to the human eye, the dragonflies vanish, at least to us. If I'd never taken the dragonflies off their home planet, this particular spectacle wouldn't have been possible. Lasante's low atmospheric pressure, humidity, and gravitational forces keep the dragonflies' wings from ever generating enough heat to reach the ultraviolet range. My client opened the box wide after that. A dozen dragonflies poured out into the glass chamber, flickering in and out of existence. Every time they returned to the visible light spectrum, they would flash dazzlingly back to view, like a meteor shower encased in glass. It's a vast universe out there, and every single living thing in it's got something that makes them special, he told me. As long as you've got the right eyes to see it. I've quoted that first line quite a bit over the years, especially when writing about all the interstellar wonders I've come across. But it wasn't until spending 3 months on Qian Mi that I'd come to understand the second half of what he told me. It wasn't just the glowing of the dragonflies that stunned me, after all. They'd seemed marvelous to me because of my human eyes and their human limitations. Our narrow visible light spectrum, spanning the short distance between 400, what we see as purple, and 700 nanometers, red. If I'd been a vacasse, say, able to see much deeper into the ultraviolet spectrum, those dragonflies wouldn't have disappeared, and I wouldn't have seen them as anything special at all. Since coming to that realization, I've come to respect my human physiology a bit more, limitations and all. Even if it means I can only experience a part of the universe and never the whole. I'm happy with making the most of what I can. Before I left, my client told me that those dazzling dragonflies were part of a bigger plan. He was planning a surprise wedding for his fiancée. He needed something else to complete his surprise, a mystery song named Silver Heart. And for that, he'd need my help again. Besas. My ship's bioscanners don't have information on how other species communicate, or on whether they follow the usual galactic social etiquette. I landed on Besas temporarily because of a ship malfunction when I ran into an intelligent life form on the planet for the first time. He was massive, no visible mouth or ears, like a rhinoceros without a face. I started miming out some gestures with my hands, trying to ask where I could stay the night. In response, he reached toward me, his palm, as large as a young elephant's foot, wrapped all the way around my forearm. For a second, I thought he was initiating some newfangled handshake, but I realized after a moment that the life form was trying to communicate with me. I could feel countless thin spines on his palm. From later reading, I learned these are called speech needles, gently pressing against my skin, the pressure rolling like the tide from my wrist down to my elbow. The speech needles formed different shapes against my skin, representing different symbols or meanings. The needles could go soft and supple, too, like young pine needles in early winter, making contact with their blunter sides rather than their sharp tips. All these different patterns represented subtle variations in tone and mood. I closed my eyes, concentrating with all my might on this unfamiliar language and its alien sensations. There were 3 kinds of tactile stimuli I noticed: pressure, temperature, and texture. And the sequence, repetition, and duration of touches seemed to compose a unique grammatical system. I could roughly make out that he was asking about my identity and conveying a sense of goodwill. His motion slowed to a stop. Obviously, he was waiting for my response. For a second, I wanted to run back to my ship and grab my translation module. Then I gave it a second thought. What if I was the first human to ever communicate with a Basatian? I traveled more than any of us. Well, just listening wouldn't count as communicating exactly. I had to find a way to convey my own thoughts, too. And when in Rome, right? I'm a pretty good accordionist, after all. If any human was going to communicate with their fingers alone, it might as well be me. All right, I thought. It's my time to shine. In my head, I concentrated on the words I wanted to get across. I'm a traveler. Can you take me to a ship repair station? Then I gently tapped away across his arm with my fingertips, trying to keep to 3/4 time in hopes of making my words as warm and friendly as a waltz. To finish up, I patted him 3 times with the palm of my hand, like a parent encouraging a well-behaved child. Surely, I thought, that of all things must be a universal gesture. With that, I ended my sentence, or rather my performance, and waited for the stranger's response. Suddenly, all the speech needles wrapped around my arm and went stiff and frigid, temperature plummeting. Oh, no, I'm an idiot. I've pissed him off, and now I'm going to get myself killed. Words fell from my mouth before I could think twice. I'm so sorry. I was just trying to not look stupid. But what's the point? It's not like he can hear me, I realized. Suddenly, his grip relaxed and his entire body shook rhythmically, as if he were laughing at me. Had he understood what I'd said? Then I realized what had happened. It wasn't that he had an auditory system, per se. Human speech and its intonation was subtler than I anticipated, and all those subtleties were best translated directly from the vibrations of speech in my bones straight to his hand. A much more effective method of communication than the silly game of charades I'd been playing with my fingertips, to say the least. After that, he took me to a nearby repair station. Even though we didn't quite speak the same language, we each expressed ourselves honestly and plainly, chatting the whole way there. By the time we parted ways, we'd become good friends. He even pointed me toward the shortest path to Echo. And you know what? All this time, and I still don't know a single word. A Basatian. Echo. This time, I was hired to record a full version of Miss Serena's famous song, Silver Heart. Only a snippet of the song's first half was available worldwide. Even so, that minute-long tune was a massive hit 20 years ago, especially in the lower reaches of the galaxy. In interviews, she said that she'd written the full song and planned to perform it on tour, but Serena was killed in an accident during an asteroid belt race shortly after. And since then, nobody had any way of knowing what the rest of the song would have sounded like. Stardom at a galactic scale, even more of a flash in the pan than ever. Soon enough, nobody was left that still cared about Serena's unfinished song, except for one of her diehard fans, that is. My client offered me quite a pretty penny for a recording of that lost second half. Apparently, he'd heard through the grapevine that before Serena's premature death, she'd performed the song once on her home planet of Echo. The first thing I did after arriving was seek out a local guide. He'd heard of Serena, but to him, she was just one of the countless famous musicians the planet had produced over the years, and most visitors to Echo weren't exactly fans of pop music. This piqued my interest, so I asked him why this planet seemed to have such a unique connection to music. On Echo, he told me, sound doesn't decay. Even the words we're speaking now? That's right. He explained that the atmosphere of Echo acted as a resonance field, which was a fictional energy field that conserves the intensity of sound through the interaction of sound waves in the atmosphere. That resonance field was continuously supplying energy to sound waves and keeping that sound intact. It was then I realized what I'd been hired to do. I wasn't here to dig through flea markets searching for a lost record, but rather to capture the very sound of her concert all those years ago. Like an astronomer using their telescope to observe cosmic background radiation, I was here to use the recording device in my hand to capture the sounds of the distant past. If it's true that sound doesn't decay here, I said curiously, it'd make sense that the sound would have to be surrounded by more sound. But it's pretty quiet out here, isn't it? My guide nodded before pointing towards some nearby hot air balloons. Old sounds, he told me, rise higher and higher above sea level with time, until they leave the resonance field entirely. If we wanted to look for the voices of the past, we'd have to make our way into the sky. We commandeered a hot air balloon, riding slowly up toward the clouds. As we rose in elevation, an indistinct drone of noise around us slowly began to become clearer and clearer. The crying of newborn babies, the congratulatory cheering of a city hall's topping out ceremony, and the sound of singing. Should be right around here. Attuned to the first half of the song, the recording oscilloscope in my hand started to buzz. But the sound it was picking up was awfully distorted, like the sound of a wobbly record. It hit me that I needed to maintain a certain relative speed to the sound, so I had my guide accelerate the balloon to match the speed of the airflow around us. Eventually, I made out the tune of Silver Heart. You really are a weirdo, my guide said. Usually, people come here to dig for gossip, or to eavesdrop on what their rivals in love have been up to last week, or to see if some killer on the runs leaked any dark secrets. That kind of thing. Or some goody two-shoes, huh? Just here for the music. Call it a hobby of mine, I said, and slipped him a heavy tip. That got his attention fast. You know, boss, he said excitedly, if you're really a music lover, I've got the coordinates to a spot way up in the clouds. The purest classical music you'll ever hear, from 5 centuries ago. You interested? Guess I'll have to spend a while longer here. Volai. Sometimes people tend to boil planets down into a simple generalization of their more unique qualities, like Echo, the planet where sound doesn't decay. But even the smallest variables can make a huge difference on the life and culture of a planet. Echo, the planet I'd just left, is only one of 3 habitable planets in its star system. Volai is much closer to the star system's sun. The star's energetic impact is much higher as a result, with Volai's resonance field extending down into the planet's crust. I had the opportunity to join an expedition into the deep valleys of Volai. Because of their narrowness and depth, these valleys trap sound inside them, like a beam of light bouncing between a pair of parallel mirrors, if those mirrors also passed energy to the light within each bounce, keeping it from ever dimming. Volai is full of such strange rock formations, sinkholes, caves, and fjords, all stuffed to the brim with trapped sounds. Sound amber, some explorers call it. Face forward and look at my hand with your peripheral vision, the expedition leader instructed over the transceiver. He stood next to a stalactite I had on my right. I saw him snap his fingers, but strangely enough, even though he was standing on my right, I heard the snap come from my left. The leader smiled. Neat, right? It was a spot he'd often brought visitors to, apparently. I asked him if the effect was due to the labyrinth of rock around us. Maybe the sound waves bounced off the stone in a way that made it to my left ear quicker than my right, I guessed. It turned out I was half right. My right ear would have heard the snap first, but the acoustics in the cave amplified the sound on the left side enough to trick my brain into thinking that the snap came from the left to begin with. We continued forward. After crawling through an icy fissure, we emerged in a closed chamber of pure sound amber. The centuries-old classical music I'd heard on Echo had taken us to the farthest reaches of the planet's atmosphere. But here, in these bubbles trapped in Volai's crust, sounds went back tens of thousands of years. The lowing of ancient beasts, the sounds of primitive tribal tools, and songs in the long-forgotten ancient languages. I couldn't pinpoint the direction each of these sounds was coming from, unlike the six-eared Volaites. But I felt as if I were in some far-flung cave in the midst of a thunderstorm, submerged in the chilling yet passionate clamor of an ancient tribe. Rosso. The reason I had agreed to help my client record that song to begin with was that it was along the way to my actual destination, the third planet in Echo and Volai's star system, Rosso. At Rosso's distance from its sun, the effect on sound and its amplification was pretty weak, because high-frequency sound has a shorter wavelength and is more easily absorbed and scattered as it travels. Most of the sound that fills the air of Rosso is low frequency. I checked into a bed and breakfast at Rosso's heart, only to notice the owner murmuring something toward an empty corner of the room. Kruger, prepare 3 marinated eggs and 2 slices of banana wheat bread for tomorrow morning. She was talking to the manager of a coffee shop 2 blocks away, she told me. Her low-frequency voice would pass through the walls and reach her interlocutor, clear as day. Their society lacked any long-distance communication devices, as everyone was already used to talking to each other over considerable distances. They were used to picking out only the words meant for them, too, like how we might pick out someone calling our name even in the midst of a bustling cocktail party. So, that's how it is. As I landed, I'd realized that Rosso's planetary radius was much smaller than its 2 sister planets, with a denser atmosphere and higher overall temperature. Because of this, 2 Rossonians, standing on opposite sides of the planet, can talk to each other without their words fading in volume. Speed of sound, too, was much faster here. The denser air and the higher the temperature, the faster the speed of that sound. When I first arrived, I was still aware of the constant drone of low-frequency sound, but I got used to it after only a few hours spent in the planet's resonance field, like how the noisy air conditioner in your office becomes nothing but white noise after a while. But I couldn't shake a sense of déjà vu, like I'd experienced something like this before. One more thing, I remarked to the bed and breakfast owner. Do you have any off-planet guests here? They're a rare sight, she replied. All the tourists flock to Echo, holy land of music and all that. The only ones left on this planet are all the old folk like us who refuse to move. You're the first traveler I've seen around here since the Kinmite from last time. Kinmite? Now that was a surprise. Her name, it wasn't Jitu by any chance, was it? So you 2 know each other. The owner nodded. Her voice gotten too low as she aged. She traveled all over the galaxy for a while until she realized that this was the only place where there were still people who could speak on the same frequency as her. She stayed here for 2 years, but in the end her voice deepened to the point that even we couldn't hear it anymore. That's when she said her goodbyes. It turned out that Jitu really had left her planet and become an interstellar traveler after all. I was struck by how small this universe really was. That night, I stepped out of my room and hiked up a nearby hillside. I pulled out my recording oscilloscope, trying to find a trace of the sound she'd left behind in the air. But sounds fade faster here than on its sister planets. Even the lowest of sounds slowly scattered into nothingness. After a week on Drosso, I fired up my ship and left the star system behind. Looking at those 3 planets in my rearview mirror, I couldn't help but wonder that despite sharing a single sun, each of them were one of a kind, from their climates down to their cultures. My past self wouldn't have been able to appreciate it, ignorant as I was. Oh, and one more thing. Later down the line, I did run into Shitu again. But that's a story for another time. This story was originally published in Chinese in Science Fiction World, November 2023. Translated and published in cooperation with Storycom and Science Fiction World. Thank you so much again for joining us for today's story. We have one more story left for you for the month of March, and I do hope you can come back and listen should you so choose. Thank you for being a part of this magazine through your subscriptions, through your telling a friend about a story that you particularly like, and for listening to these narrations. I hope you'll come back and listen to yet another one. Until you do, I bid you a very fond and hopefully very temporary farewell.